All right, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of what we are affectionately calling Jake and Friends, right? Where we're basically talking to a variety of different sales leaders, marketing leaders, CEOs, just about different topics that are timely. Obviously right now there's a lot of content out there. I think one of the things that we're really working on is trying to come up with ways to bring you different perspectives. And really, I think now it's also starting to think about what comes on the other side of this, right? I think more and more people are starting to realize like, okay, there's going to be a new normal. There's going to be some type of, new opportunity coming out the other end of this. And so, what are the things we should start to think about now? And so, you and I were going back and forth a little bit on leadership in particular. And I know that that's something that you're passionate about. And so I thought, I've been reading, what's his name? Stephen Covey's book. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? Successful people, effective people. I should know. Do you know the book? You know what I'm talking about, Michael?
Yes.
Yeah. What's the book called? 7 Effective People?
7 Highly Effective Habits, right?
Yeah, that's it. So anyway, I've been reading that book and I'm really inspired by this concept of like management and leadership, because what I feel like if you look on LinkedIn and you look at other places, it's just about being a leader is this and being a leader is that. And I candidly find I'm like, it's impossible. If you look up all these definitions, combined, like being a leader is impossible, right? Like it's impossible to like live up to this, like, I don't know, like what's been put in front of us. So I think it'll be good to just talk through, what that means. Like, what do you think it means? What does it mean to you? And then, look, let's take your Q&A on this. So if you're joining us on LinkedIn, you can feel free to drop your questions in the comments. We appreciate all of you tuning in. If you're on the Zoom, you can drop your questions in the Q&A. Either way, just drop us a quick note in the chat, just what company you're with, what role you have. If you're on LinkedIn, same thing. You don't really need your name, just what company you're at, your role, and we'll try to kind of customize some of these questions to that as well too. So, first up, man, is maybe just I'd love to get kind of your take on this kind of leadership and management, and maybe even, what you think that looks like today, and what are the differences you think between leadership and management and how that's evolving. I'd love to get like, your take on this. I know that this is something that you're super passionate on.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And thanks for having me on, Jake. So good morning, everybody. This topic has had so many thousands of books written on it. Everybody's got a different take on what a leader is or what a manager is. But at the same time, it varies. You can read a book by McKinsey, and these are incredibly smart people, but many of them have actually never rolled up their sleeves and actually done the job. Yeah. And that's not to try to disparage anybody, but there's a difference between management with your feet up on the desk, and there's actually management by getting dirty, understanding how the job gets done, and then sitting at the boardroom table and being able to translate with a hat that can pivot to both sides. Yeah. So those of us that have had experience in selling earlier in our careers and have grown up watching and enduring a bunch of painful lessons along the way, I think there's a lot lacking today, and the pandemic that we're going through is only going to highlight how drastic the need is for leaders to have more empathy, more trust in their people, and they're going to have to build future leaders in hiring people that they really feel have the potential to become the managers of tomorrow, versus just the mercenaries that can just go kill it and sell a bunch of stuff. Damn the cost and the damage that's possibly done internally sometimes. So empathy and resilience to me are the absolute 2 most critical things. And I've learned some really good lessons from some coaches and mentors along the way. And we can obviously talk more about that as this unfolds.
Yeah. I think empathy is the other word, the other buzzword of the day, right? This concept of empathy, right? And, I've heard it defined a lot of different ways, but when you think about it as a leader, from a leadership standpoint, how would you define empathy as a leader? And obviously, look, part of it is it might manifest differently for different people that you lead. I get that, I understand. But, is there any type of macro empathy, kind of like topic or thing, that you can think of that's more universal?
Well, I probably am a little guilty of this as I've managed people over the years. Empathy means obviously a lot of things, but I've had a lot of managers, CEOs, people I've ultimately reported to over the course of my career that empathy is non-existent when they walk out of the office, meaning, the work boss cares about their people to a certain extent, some more than others. But as soon as they leave and they go home, their personal life never intersects with these people. So I've worked for CEOs that in years of driving hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue have never asked me a single question about my wife or kids.
Yeah.
Like ever. And so, caring about your people, there has to be a fine line. There has to be a reasonable balance. I try to get to know the people that I've hired or I inherit if I start with a new company. And you try to get to know them as people, but there has to be a line that everybody understands there's still a management responsibility and a reporting hierarchy, and the job has to come first in terms of executing. But when somebody has a child that's sick, or somebody has a parent that is having surgery, or whatever is going on, there has to be some actual blood pumping through the veins, and it's just not cold capitalism, because life's too short, excuse the French, to work for assholes. It's just too short. And I learned too many lessons that you could make a lot of money in a lot of places and work for a lot of good people. But there is more than just making a dollar. And as we get older, sometimes we drift a little further away from that. I'm at a point in my life and career that, if I take another executive role, we're going to make sure that the people that I surround myself with care about those around them, and that they understand what the people on the front lines do every single day intimately, and that they can appreciate that these are people. They're not statistics in a computer.
Yeah. All right. So there's a level of appreciating what the person is going through. Is that like a fair way to say it? Like when you think about what that looks like versus, like you said, like I'm just managing you, I'm your boss, like that type of stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's I think I see a little bit of that as well too. And remember, everyone, if you're joining us on the Zoom, please drop in your job title, what company you're at. It'll be good for us to be able to see, what you guys are up to. If you're on LinkedIn Live, you can tune in. I see we're starting to get some questions roll in here. So some of the questions we had from yesterday when I posted here, and I want to get your kind of quick input on is, we had. Shruti Kapoor says, doesn't it depend on whom you're leading? Will the same leadership style work with everyone on your team, right? And so tell me, what's your initial take on that? What do you think about when you think about, this idea? Because I think we're all familiar with this concept of situational leadership, right? Which is like, it might look a little bit different from person to person. So how do you think about that? How have you tackled that in your career? How have you tackled, situational, leadership?
Well, and we've interacted before. I think she's dead on correct. You could have a business model where you have a really young sales force. That's what's needed. And these are really young, talented sales professionals, but they're still figuring out their craft, and they need the mentoring. They want the coaching. They want you jumping in the trenches with them and falling on the grenade when they can't answer a question in a client meeting, and filling in the gaps. I call it the mortar between the bricks. I threw that out on a comment this morning for somebody that had chimed in on your post. But then you have parts of a sales team, parts of a sales organization, or an entire organization that's made up of really senior, uber experienced sales professionals who they're all going to need something. We all need coaching and mentoring, but they probably don't need the level of oversight to track how many calls they're making a day and how many connections and dials and sort of the mundane, more training elements of sales professions. So Frankly, Jake, that for me, that's a big segue with management when you talk about the youngest generation that's in the workforce today. So if you take a look at sort of the 21 to 30-year-olds, and having hired a lot of them, they want to work hard. Sometimes this generation gets a really bad rap. They get a bad rap that they're lazy. And I don't think that they're lazy at all. I think the current generation is looking at people like me, people older than me, and they're saying, okay, it's great that you worked 60 to 80 hours a week and you were on airplanes nonstop, but what do you have to show for it besides money, right? They want to know that, yes, they can work hard. Yes, they can make a great living, but that they're doing this for a purpose. There's something, whether it's more experiences versus, dollars and cents, but they want to have a purpose and a sense of connectedness and pulling that same flag up the same hill like a real team does. And I find that that's a big gap between, say, my generation and the current generation is there's not a lot of appreciation for what they want out of the workforce. And they feel like they're a number in a computer. And so I think empathy comes in there and trying to understand the current generation. That's the future of the entire economy.
Right. Yeah, I agree. What I feel like is I was really, I look back to my leadership experience. I was so fortunate that I got my first, I got leadership. It was a much smaller organization in a small capacity, but my first real leadership opportunity was at a larger company. It was at Career Builder in like the late 2000s. And so I went through a formal like leadership development program and a leadership training program and got continual development on how to have one-on-ones with people and how to have goals meetings with people. And what I feel like the big issue, at least that I see, is that we're not really training people on leadership or management right now. I feel like what we're doing is we are throwing people who are decently good at a job, and this just isn't in sales, this is in accounting, this is in a lot of roles. We're throwing these people that were good at a job into a role and expecting them to be able to emulate what made them successful with other people. And I think one of the things that I learned in kind of early on in my first year, 2 years of leadership experience was, just how to just understand different people have different motivations for coming to work. And if you can't get aligned on what those motivations are, and this had nothing to do with millennials. This is like millennials were still in like junior high or high school then, I feel like people have always wanted this. This is not necessarily even a new, and every generation thinks the generation before them was lazy. Every single one, right? Like there's no generation that's like, wow, they work a lot harder than we do. Not a single generation has ever said that. So my thought is, I feel like if we're really going to solve for this management leadership, we have to look at the training that we're giving new leaders. And I don't know what your experience was like when you first moved into leadership, but I know I would never, and this goes for a lot of people, this might be like sacrilegious to some of you too, I would never have my first leadership job be at a startup, or my second leadership job, I would go to a big company, because there you will actually get trained.
So that's a great point though, but tell me, I see if we agree on this. Why would you not take your first leadership role, if you could do it all over again, at a startup?
Well, I'm fortunate that I didn't, right? But we work with so many companies that I see what's happening, because you learn techniques the same way that you learn sales techniques, right? That you grow, you learn leadership techniques. You learn how to handle difficult conversations, how to put someone on plan the right way, how to make sure your company doesn't get sued, how to have a one-on-one, how to have a deal conversation versus a goals conversation versus a performance on a conversation, and why those three should never be mixed up. That I think that there's skills and techniques that you learn when you go to a big company that you can take with you wherever you go, and so that would be what I think about, that's where I would lean in.
I agree with what you said. And just to add a little to it, leadership for the first time at a startup is so difficult, because most startups, the thrill of having that pace and jumping on the treadmill and everything's going Mach 5 usually means that all of the leaders, including down to the ground level, everybody's running with their hair on fire, and you don't get the essential training to really learn how to be a leader. You learn how to drive numbers, and you get good at the playbook and the rinse and repeat of what behaviors and what actions lead to deals and lead to partnerships. And to me, it's misleading. So I was asked a couple months ago in a forum, another online forum, in an interview, and it was a webcast about sales leadership and like, what are the traits? And I came up, I jotted a couple of them down again, and I just said, can a leader help you balance your emotions when you're negotiating a deal? Can they help you balance your emotions when the prospect is driving a one-sided deal and both sides need to feel a pinch? Otherwise, deep down, you know you don't have a good deal on your hands. You know, can you work with others internally the way you show the same respect for your prospects externally? Do you treat your internal customers with the thank yous and the appreciation that's needed? So that's part of what I would try to do, because everybody's busy, and I want to try to reduce the sort of administrivia and let salespeople do what they do best. But little by little, I want them to appreciate what goes on behind the scenes.
Sure.
That paves the way for them to focus on the external sell, right? And managing the right relationships, and especially on the marketing side, which is so crucial. You know, there was a post on your LinkedIn over the weekend, something to the effect of, you know, there's always that balance, especially now with the pandemic, of marketing's giving me too few leads. Okay, well then the opposite is they're giving me too many leads, but none of them are quality leads. So it's the quality versus quantity argument, right?
Salespeople have never had enough leads. Let's just go ahead and call that what it is, right? I've never met a salesperson live who's like, you know, I'm good on leads. I'm good.
Right. Well, I just finished a study. One of the boards I sit on, they asked me to put a study together on how they feel companies are going to come out of this pandemic, with not just business being different. It's clearly going to change in many different ways, but what ways is it going to change in terms of culture and behavior, and what may never come back and what may change for the better? So I had brief 30-minute interviews with about 35 companies over the last several weeks, and aggregated what their thoughts were, what's really going to change. And believe it or not, one of the top 3 answers of about 30 that we kept track of, because there was more than 50 answers. Right. Top 3 was, I think senior leadership is going to come out of this realizing that the ground level troops, whether it's marketing, it's sales, they are essential to the business, and we're people. We're people. We're not just a cog in a wheel that cranks a quota out and it's purely numbers. I do think there's going to be some more empathy. We're seeing all kinds of examples in the world right now of tremendous human kindness from first responders, doctors, nurses, grocery clerks, I mean, the people putting their lives on the line. So, you know, we have the benefit to work from home, and I think there's going to be a moderate amount of empathy in the first year that changes drastically in executives' tones, the way they address their teams.
I don't think it'll last a year, man. I'd like to think it'll last a year. I think it'll last maybe like 3 to 6 months. You know, I feel like it's been enough to kind of cause a change to the system, but I don't know if it was enough to cause like all of these things will evolve. It's just, you know, we will continue to go back to that, meaning like what, especially in sales leadership. You know, I talked about this on Thursday. There's, you know, kind of the latest evolution of sales leadership has went toward the technology, what technology that we're using, et cetera. And so we've been this completely eliminated all the empathy and different things that we're talking about now out of the sales process, and focused all of our time on executing the technology and reading the technology versus reading the people, and salespeople then reading the people on the other end. And I think that's the median that's what will have to come, not the median, that's what we'll have to come back around to, is this combination of the two. And I think leadership is the same thing, that because we've given leaders all these reports and dashboards and ways to look at things, et cetera, they feel like they can measure everything But what we're not doing is training on how to work with an individual, how to pull the most out of an individual, how to unleash that internal motivation of the individual. And I think that to me is probably the biggest area of opportunity, is how do we go back to it? Some of the more tactical ways, for me, I'll just kind of give you my kind of tactics, is that with every direct report, and it's funny, I was looking at my calendar and I sent like a I'm sorry email out literally to the team last week, and then to another group of people, where I hadn't had a goals one-on-one with some of my team members for like 60 to 90 days. And usually it's like, it's again, like you said, if it's someone that I'm just now working with, it's monthly, or then it goes to quarterly. But I realize that it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, that when you're not investing in the person and helping them to get better, to where then, 6, 12, 24 months from now, they're solving their own problems because you've invested. It's so much easier to just deal coach. It's so much easier to look at a dashboard. It's so much easier to, give someone advice. Like, I feel like most leaders now, it's just like a combination of, it's like, they're almost just like, we've almost equated leadership to mentorship, which is like, I give people advice and I give them, here's how I would do it, or here's how I've seen it done, versus I'm investing time in the person. And that could be because we're worried that people are churning. I think that will be one thing that sticks, though. If I had to say it, Michael, I think I think tenure is going to go up. I think when we come back from an unemployment standpoint, I think you will see tenure become better. And I think that will be lasting for at least a few years. But I feel like there's a lot of different details in here around how we change the concept, not from management to leadership, but even from mentorship to management or leadership. So that's just like my hot take on it.
I fear you're right. I hope you're wrong. Right? I'm hoping that there's some more lasting change, because what the whole world's going through right now is so much bigger than just the sales world, but it's a microcosm of it. And it's exposing all parts of the world that have been interested in nothing but the Benjamin. And money's great. Everybody wants to make a lot of money. So no argument there. Go out and make some money. But Scott Leese and Richard Harris. So Scott had a fantastic post Friday. Knowing we were going to talk, I saw this and a couple jumped out at me. So he made a post, Scott did. He said, my 5 biggest regrets on the business side. The first 3 were incredibly compelling that were relevant here. Number 1, working for tyrants. He said, never again. Getting an 11 p.m. email to do an 8 a.m. presentation and working all night to do it. It's just inconsiderate. There are situations, of course, you have to do that stuff, but working for tyrants was one. He said, never again. He said, didn't swing for the fence enough. So really putting himself in a position with the kind of startup that he sees having a really big future. I would always tell a ton of my sales folks over the years, you don't have to find the next Google. There aren't that many of them, right? But if you can find a place that you can make a nice living, be part of a fantastic culture, and then from an equity standpoint, from a cluster of startups over your career, take down 2 to 5 to 10 years worth of income on the equity side with IPOs, you can live a wonderful life and be happy who you're doing it for. Okay.
Sure.
So didn't swing for the fence enough. And the third of the 5 was didn't vet the founders enough. Right. There are really great founders I've worked for, and there are some that look good on paper, but like all people, we're all fallible. We have weaknesses, but is the weakness not trusting anybody? Is the weakness never delegating? Because no startup founder is going to take a company to $500 million in sales and do it successfully without tons of train wrecks because they haven't been there before. So empathy takes a lot of forms and styles, but I think it's knowing things about yourself, Jake, that you could look in the mirror and say, I'm good at X, but I'm bad at Y. And I don't always have to publicize that I'm bad at Y, but I need to find people to surround myself with that are good at that to help me be better.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And I think it is okay. I mean, I've said this before, and I realized this probably 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. So when I was at Glassdoor and we were scaling, I started to hire field reps. And these are people that were, 45, 50 plus years old. And, I was 30 at the time. And I really struggled leading them because I couldn't understand why they didn't want to grow, that they were happy. They had a nice house in San Diego or Indianapolis or wherever. And the growth mindset was like, I just want to close more deals. And I realized, you know what? I'm a really terrible leader for that person. Like, I'm a tyrant for that person because I can't fathom it. It's so against my DNA that I can't fathom it. And so for me though, I'm okay with that. Look, and it's one of our core values at Scaled, which is always growing. And we have very clear definitions of what that means. And so if you don't have a growth mindset and I'm the CEO, really bad place for you. You could be a really, really good person and a really great fit for someone else, but you're not going to be a fit at Scaled. And that's okay, right? And I realized that as a leader, I'm like, you know what? I need to make sure people feel safe and comfortable no matter what. That's a whole other thing. But also value-wise, there's people who are going to really hate it, and that's okay. It's, if you talk to Amazon, et cetera, having a culture that, but I think a lot of this is though you being honest with yourself, and I think that was, a big mindset is I was like, man, why are these people struggling, et cetera? And I'm like, oh, they're good. That's good, So, but yeah, I think that's a big, that was a big learning lesson for me, I should say.
Yeah, I had a lesson. So years ago, I ran a strategy consulting firm for about 13 years. And when my partner and I built it up, we were about 4 or 5 clients in, and I had a client, the CEO, after working with them for about 6 months, family business, had a small group of lieutenants around him, 2 from the family and 2 from outside the family. And they were a good, effective team, but they were struggling to scale.
Right.
They were about $125 million manufacturing company at the time. And after about 6 months of us working with them, the CEO paid a really big compliment. He had a very high level of emotional intelligence. He was comfortable with what he knew and certainly what he didn't know. And he wasn't reporting to Wall Street. There was no ego there. But one day we're sitting around in a strategy session, about 10 of us, and he just said, he goes, Mike, you and your team know more about our business than we do at this point. How come you never chime in and tell us what to do? And it was humbling. I said, frankly, we don't know more about your business than you do, but we appreciate that. You have to be comfortable with the changes that you make. You have to be comfortable that you're wanting to go there. You have to be comfortable that you need to go there, because only when you are in that position will you do it. Because you don't have to do anything. You're a privately held, family-owned company. You can do whatever you want. If more people took that position today and they hired people around them that can make them better, the old, hire people smarter than you adage, then I think the business world would be at least a slightly different place compared to what it is today.
Yeah, let's pull on this. I feel like, if I'm being candid, I feel like sometimes you struggle as a leader to do this, and I'll share my own kind of plight with this. That sometimes you can hire people that might be more proficient than you in certain areas, but if you come with a certain domain expertise, that can be hard. And I think too, you're also limited by cash, and you might want to, you might want to hire someone more senior, but you can't. And that becomes difficult. It becomes kind of a chicken or egg problem, right? It becomes you're growing people. So you have to have a level of, you probably have more experience than them in some areas, but they do have certainly more experience than you than others. But I think that is something that I've struggled with. I think to really hire people that I've empowered enough or have enough experience, right, to truly be stronger. And now there's certain areas like finance and operations where it's just like, dude, I'm not proficient here. But I think I've struggled with that. Like as you're scaling with the balance between the cash and the experience. And it's a real plight as you're scaling your business. I can just tell you that it's very difficult to constantly balance that. So how would you, if you're a small business, there's Eric Taylor in here was talking about growing his business. How do you balance that piece in particular in a small business, you know, or even a larger one?
Boy, that's $64,000 question, because look at so many business leaders, not just sales leaders. When you have really good people who are doing a great job for you, and you can't be everywhere at once, and you have more things on your plate than you can complete in a day, sometimes we gravitate towards letting our best people just totally go on autopilot because we just know they're producing, or they're training well, or they're managing their team well. And so we let them go on autopilot, but not because they're going to go off the tracks, but by leaning in and paying closer attention with them and collaborating with them, they might even be better or greater.
That's right.
So it's a chicken and an egg. You know, I love younger generations of business people, because in many cases they're really open-minded and they want to coach it and they crave it.
Yeah.
They come asking for it. But the flip side is it's finding that balance with your more tenured people that have been in the industry for a long time. Somebody posted over the weekend, I was reading a good post, and they said, it's a fine balance between not being there and acting like you trust your people, but being perceived as aloof because you're not around, versus micromanaging and being like the helicopter manager that's always there, always questioning. And in some cases, if you inherit a team and you're a new leader, you're not being a micromanager. You actually want to learn what your best people have been doing.
Yeah.
And so it's a really hard balance. There's no great answer for that, but I do think you have to trust your people. And if you don't trust your people, it's really hard. And, you know, in the last couple decades, you have yourself, I have, most people have, we've been in situations where you have a team that you've built, you're proud of your team, you're producing, you're doing a fantastic job. There's always room for improvement, but you're always riding that balance between somebody that you ultimately report to that just doesn't take the view of people and empathy and value that you do. So it's just always, you know, this is the most important month in the history of the company. Well, every single month cannot be the most important history.
Exactly. You can only ride that for so long. And the other thing that behavior does, I've seen it firsthand from a company that kind of imploded in New York, that they had such a pride around hitting quota 24 months in a row that there was no long-term focus. There was no building. There was no, hey, you know what? We might miss these next 2 months, but then we're going to be in a better place. And the company ended up raising, you know, 55 million in one round and ended up selling for 25 million 2 years later. And I think that mindset of always taking that focus is such a hard one, though, man. I've got to tell you, I've been being a VP of sales at 2 different venture-backed startups. It's the thing that is like Tony Gore posted about, she actually dropped this in the chat to me personally. She said, also, individuals have to empathize with their leaders. And I think it really is a two-way street that you have to understand as a VP, you're put in a tough position. It's so, it is at a growing startup, especially if you're venture backed, you are damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't hit the numbers, you know, then you can't scale according to the board. If you do hit the numbers, then you can't scale because you're not focused on the longer term things. And I feel like that it, for all, you know, there was a saying, it's like, in order to be a great leader, you have to know how to be led. And I feel like not enough people take that mindset either. Like, well, maybe my boss is doing this. I had a conflict with one of our consultants last week, and, you know, he came out of left field with this email, and I'm like, dude, you were taking this to some crazy place because you're making assumptions about what I'm thinking or something. Like, just pick up the phone. Let's have the conversation. And I feel like you've got to, and I learned this lesson from the director that I had back when I was like 27, that, you know, you got to just kind of drink the Kool-Aid a little bit too, and trust that this person, that you pick the right organization, and let it play out for 6 months, 12 months, you know, get to know that person. And so I feel like those are some lessons I learned, and I want to let you finish your thought, but it is very, very hard, to just, you got to sell out and drink the Kool-Aid a little bit and allow yourself to be led too, because your boss and your boss's boss are probably dealing with things that you don't fully appreciate. Look, you don't have to, fully appreciate all of it, nor should you, but you have to have an appreciation for it. So that's my take also, I think, on followership, which is, I think, just as an important skill to learn as leadership.
I couldn't agree more. The balance in leadership is sometimes impossible when you have a set of demands being placed on you to push down to your teams, but in your heart that those new practice putting in place, the new way of selling, new tools, whatever it is deep down in your heart, it's the absolute wrong thing for both morale, short and long-term results, and you're caught in the middle. And frankly, it's a lose-lose situation, because then you're not pleasing the CEO, but you're also losing the morale of your team, who starts to think that you don't have their back. But they also appreciate that I don't sign their check in that case, and somebody else does, but it's a very tough spot.
Because you can't say that to them. If you're a frontline leader, your first responsibility is to the company, not the people. And I feel like that is what most leaders don't get. They want to be the buddy leader, and the buddy leader is the worst leader. Again, it goes back to, like, if you believe in radical candor philosophy too, and which I definitely do. So I think for a lot of people, it's that mix between, I'm invested in you, but also you've got to toe the company line. It's not, well, my boss, I want to do this for you, Jimmy, but no, man, you got to represent the company. And I feel like not enough leaders are willing to draw that line. And again, because I went through leadership training, I learned how to deal with those conversations and those types of things. So we've got a good question here. I'm gonna pass this one to you. We actually have 2 or 3 questions coming in. So everyone, do me a favor to drop your comments in. Right now, the default on Zoom is kind of a pain in the ass. It just goes to Michael and I and all panelists. Make sure to share it with all attendees too. So Ben Harbert says, what's a good way to embrace a change-aware mindset to hedge against getting stagnant, AKA we do it this way because we've always done it this way. So whether you're in leadership and you're doing that battle upward, or you're on the front lines and you're having that conversation, how have you handled this scenario? Because I think this is where a lot of people fall into this.
Falling into the trap of things kind of getting stale and not moving forward from in the trenches, management. What do you think?
I think it's both. I think it's, you get in those situations where you're like, I don't think I can do anything right now. I've tried enough times to talk to my boss's boss, to talk to my boss, that I feel like there's a better way to do this thing, but it hasn't been successful before. And I'm scared to do it again. I'm scared to put myself out there again. I think that's what it is.
So maybe this is a way of answering this, and I'm joking, but not joking really. You had a video recently, and somebody asked you, Jake, what would you do if you don't really feel like you have a couple, 2 or 3 things that differentiate you from the competition? And you just said, geez, if you really don't think that there are some things that differentiate you, get the hell out and go work somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, it parlays into the whole leadership question. And if you are repeatedly, over and over, despite how much money you and your team may be making, despite how well the company may or may not be doing, if you're constantly being twisted in the middle between good strategy from the leadership team and all of that ideation, but then some forceful, non-negotiable demands of what your teams have to do, and then you can't please your team because you don't want to place more burdens on them, at some point, you have to look in the mirror and say, why am I here? Because something I've always told my teams, whether I ran my company years ago or sales folks over the years, a great mentor threw this phrase in my head 30 years ago. And I didn't realize it at the time because I was too young in the workforce. But he said, when the internal sale becomes harder than the external sale, dust off your goddamn resume.
But don't you think that changes as you go up the chain? I mean, like, look, here's that's the politics stuff, and I suck at it, right? So don't take too much political advice from me. It's why I've been fired multiple times in my career. I really suck at it, and I'm aware of that. It's why I had to start my own company eventually, but I do have an appreciation for it, and I think as you go up the chain, understand that becomes more of the job. That every job layer up you take, a bigger percentage of your job becomes managing up. It just is. And when you're the CEO, it's the board. It's like, I feel like people do have to have some level of appreciation, but I think you're 100% right. And my one thing that I would say, just to add on to that, and then let's go to the next question, is make sure you've left it all on the table. And I think too many people, they don't. You know what they do, Michael? They ask once, oh, I had this one idea. And guess what? The way that you presented it sucked. You said, I've got an idea for a whatever. There's no facts. There was no anything behind it. And then you got shot down. And then you brought 3 more ideas. And they were shit because you didn't even you didn't put together a business case. And so my first step, Ben, is to say, how good are you presenting your ideas? And it's not your boss or your boss's boss's job is to whittle through your free-formed thought and figure it out. So that to me would be step 1. Step 2 is iterate and do the current job and then use the extra time to do the shit that you think is experimental. And I think that's the other thing is, like, maybe you just need to execute your calls and then spend the extra 45 minutes every day doing X, Y, Z. And so at least for me, I just like to have that feeling that I left it all on the table. I tried to present ideas 4 or 5 different ways. I tried to leave it on the table and then try to get my experiments done. So then I'm like, look, I'm doing my other work. Let me go have my alone time here. And then I quit, or I get fired because I pushed too hard. But I would rather get fired and push too hard and to say I left it all on the table, which is probably a bad mindset too, than give up because I didn't try hard enough. And I feel like a lot of people quit too soon too. They quit a leader too soon before they actually find out, like, oh man, it is the way I'm presenting this idea that sucks. Actually, Jake is actually really open to listening to ideas. I just really suck at presenting them,
Well, to add on to that, you raised a couple of good points there. Sales leaders have slightly different leadership roles than other leaders in a company, right? Sales professionals sometimes make an obscene amount of money. Many of the really good ones live fantastic lifestyles, and they're true to their craft. It's being a sales person is not the butt of a joke at a cocktail party. For the real serious people, it is a profession. They are relationship builders. They take pride in what they do. Sometimes, just like leaders, the frontline sales folks lose sight of the fact that they haven't learned anything new in 5 years, right? And so there's a real delicate balancing act with egos in the world of sales, just the same way COOs have sometimes with engineering teams. It could be very similar there. I know my craft, leave me alone, let me do my job.
Yeah.
But for the really good ones, a sales leader has to be willing to go down with the ship and defend their people. And what I mean is, as a CEO, I learned that lesson in my own company many years ago, and I tried to take that to when I was reporting to CEOs and leading revenue teams. And there are times that you have to defend your team at all costs because it's for the better of the company, it's for the better of the founder, it's for the better of shareholders. And if you passionately believe it, you have to be good, like you said, at how do you tell that story? How do you argue your point? So I had a really good sales guy years ago used to say that I used to take this like reverse logic approach, and it was like a mind meld. It was like the Star Trek Vulcan mind meld to argue the point, but to bring everybody to the middle. And I don't know whether that was true or not, but I like to think of it as a calm way to get your point across, and get along with anybody. We all sat in boardrooms and prospect client rooms with people of all different types, and you have to be able to get along with everybody. But there are times, to the question that was asked, when it's getting stale. Sometimes it's getting stale because the business isn't moving forward, and a CEO, a founder, whoever might be in control is not allowing any of their leaders to do the job.
Yeah.
And when you finally have banged your head on the brick wall 1,000 times, and you can honestly say that you've given it all you can get out of this, and there is no path forward that's going to keep you happy, both financially and emotionally,
yeah,
then, for me and for many others, then you have to just know when that time is and hope you left a team in a good place, good people, and people make their own decisions about how to follow their own career at that point, because you've done what you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got some really, really good ones coming in here, man. So
Cool.
We've got a couple good questions. I'm going to combine this. Ashley Corlett said, is leadership training necessary? So I'm going to parlay that into another question we got from LinkedIn, which was, what advice do you have for someone starting in a leadership position at a new company? So I've kind of danced around some of this a little bit. Maybe we can do it one by one. So is leadership training not necessary? Absolutely. Meaning there is not a single great leader, not a single one who wasn't an assistant coach, a governor, a general, a whatever it is. And they got training from leaders that were there before them. And you cannot, there are certain traits like charisma. There are certain traits like, what are some other ones? Maybe patience. Patience, I think you can learn and get better over time, but I think certain people are dispositioned a little bit more one way or the other, that it takes a long time to get them there. There are certain traits that I think people associate with leadership that actually don't go into being great leaderships. I think Jim Collins in Built to Last or Good to Great actually realized, I think that charismatic CEOs were less likely to be one of the Built to Last companies. I think I'm quoting that correctly. So I think, yes, leadership training is absolutely necessary. You need to learn the techniques. How do I have a performance review conversation that where the other person walks out the other end of that conversation feeling good about themselves, feeling excited, feeling like there's hope, versus they walk out feeling punished? That's the technique. It took me a long time. I probably had hundreds of performance review conversations with salespeople over the last 10 years. It took me a long time to get good at that, but I had to have someone train me on that first. So I think it's that. And so my advice for the person who asked about, is it what to do? I would read relentlessly, and I would practice relentlessly, and I would understand. And every time I'm at my best versus at my worst, every time I'm at my best, I'm spending more time investing in the person and less time talking about the job. And that is a very good barometer for you, that if you're spending equal or if not more time consistently, not that you don't have a day here or there, consistently investing in the person versus critiquing the work or helping their work, then that's how you're starting to practice. So I think I would be reading. I would get really, really good mentors. That's another thing I didn't do very well early in my career. I didn't get a good list of mentors that I could go bounce ideas off. I very much learned through trial and error. But yes, I think it's necessary. Yes, I think if you want to get better, I would read and I would get mentors and then test this stuff. So I don't know how you feel about it, because I think other people do feel differently about leadership for sure.
Well, the reading element's critical. I see a lot of people in any profession, they really don't read much at all outside whatever's required for their job. So I was an English major in college, business minor. I mean, all I did was read, one thing after another, and it just led to a lifelong, journey to read. I read tons of stuff, regardless of whether it's business material or not. And I don't mean just reading like the front page of the newspaper and reading, current events, which is important and helpful to be well-rounded. But if you want to be a leader, you have to have somebody, I believe, that has been a good mentor to you. And I've been lucky. I've had a handful that have really been good people. They took an interest in me. They cared. They saw something in me, and so they invested the time. I still, to this day, I've had for going on 20 years, an executive coach that I work with, and I usually invest 2 to 3 hours a month, 2 to 3 hour long phone calls or some mix of that. And it's really just bouncing ideas off one another. There's some strategizing on work.
Sure.
A lot of it sometimes is personal life, and it's the makeup of what you're dealing with and the balance of work and personal. And the thing that I mentioned early on about getting to know your teams, caring about your people, but knowing that there's a reasonable limit. We have a job to do that has to come first. Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen in a lot of people that in the sales profession, management or field level, they don't have a good balance between their work and personal life. And so they can go on the work, but when they want to have the downtime, it's, they really struggle with the pace and whether it's keeping up with email or the work requirements. And I think the best ones, they are who they are. They're genuine, they're authentic, and they balance a little bit of who they are throughout a whole day. And then, take vacation, take downtime, recharge, get off the grid, do what you have to do.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's what I've been doing for several months now, just totally unwinding, a little sabbatical, clear the head. Then the whole pandemic hit, obviously. So that has just, in many ways, been a blessing to stay home with family and wonder, when this comes out on the other end, what to do next. But, everybody has to recharge in a different way.
Yeah.
And I've just found that if you are authentic to yourself, then your work persona really doesn't have to be very different than your personal life persona. And people can know you as you are. And those people are awesome to hire and they're awesome to work with.
That's it. Yeah. If leadership is a cap that you come in, I've said this for a long time, a cap that you come into work and put on, your people see that shit. You're fake. They're fake. They know that you're fake because they're like, this dude's sitting here telling me this. And I see him on Instagram and he's on a yacht in Croatia and he's sitting here telling me about hard work or whatever it is. So I agree. All right. So we've got about 8+ minutes. I can go a little bit over, but I'm going to do some rapid fire questions here. First question from Instagram. What do I do if I have a leader that is not the example to follow?
I would see if you have somebody else internally that you can generally confide in and better understand this person from a different perspective, different than your own relationship with them. So you're subtly validating whether that is a good perception that you've had. If you really can't relate to this person at all and they're asking things of you that just are very unnatural, then you may have to have a conversation with yourself about dusting off the resume. Life's too short. I used to say, hey, work it out. And I still believe you try to work it out. You try to see everybody's better side, ask the direct question with that boss and ask them if your perception is correct. So have the real genuine conversation, but be willing to accept that there are a lot of jobs out there and you can part ways on great terms too and say, this just isn't working for me now. I respect you, but this isn't right for me. So with your blessing, I'm going to go look for something new.
Yeah, my advice is similar. It's just sell out for a month. Whatever your boss says, just go along for the journey. There's a high likelihood that your boss isn't a piece of shit. There's a very high likelihood that actually this is probably a pretty good person who got here for a reason and that your company is not completely stupid. Now, granted, there are scenarios where that's the truth. So I think give your boss an opportunity to lead in a way that maybe you haven't had before. That would be kind of my caveat. Then when you've really done it their way. You've tried, you followed, and you're like, dude, as opposed to, I think what happens when people do that, they come out the other side, they go, oh my God, I've been a dick. I've not been helpful, right. And I feel like it goes back to, you have to want to be led first. And a lot of people think they want to be led. All right, let's go to the next one here. What is your review on servant leadership? Seems to be ripe for being used as finger pointing when things go wrong and for self-congratulations when things go great.
Well, I think it's healthy to wake up every day. And if you run the whole company, I think it's very healthy to wake up every day and flip the pyramid upside down and say, what can I do to improve the lives of everybody that works for me? But sometimes servant leadership is confused with the stats in a computer, and I gave them a job. You know, they should be thanking me and doing every single thing I say and working 19 hours a day. I think to the point of the youngest working generation, they're willing to work really hard. Guys like you and I, we're all willing to work very hard. I work as hard as most people that I know. But nowadays, more than ever, there has to be a sense of purpose. And I want to really know that regardless of who reports to who, that there's not a servant mentality. There's a trusting relationship between the people and the understanding of the hierarchy, and that we're all, maybe this is a little idealistic. I have 2 teenagers, I could relate, but I want to work in places, regardless of title, in my future, going back to some of the first few startups I ever worked at, where it just had such a great feel and everybody was pulling that same flag up the same hill. And when you rang the bell and closed just a monster deal, or somebody on your team did, everybody was genuinely ecstatic. And I want to get back to that again. We all need to get back to that again, because that's when it was fun. And then it didn't feel like a job. It felt like you were on a crusade.
Yeah. But how much of that, I got a question for you, actually, and I want to get back because we only have a little bit of time. How much of that is tenure, though? How much is it like when you're in the trenches, look, you don't have teenage kids, you're out getting ripped on Friday nights and, doing poppers and stuff. But I'm not you, of course, but I'm just saying, like, how much of that, though, is also, it becomes more difficult, I think, to maybe go back to that beginner mind, which is like to be led, to go along with that journey. Because there's definitely, I'm sure there was a group of people at those same companies that were like, ugh, these guys ring the bell. This guy, look at Michael, he's drinking the Kool-Aid. Look at him. He's selling, I feel like it's just maybe more of an important point that as you go into your next roles, go back to being a beginner for the first 3 to 6 months. Take all that experience that you had from before, but you got to give the culture a chance to change you too. Maybe that's it. But I think
you're spot on there, actually. You're spot on. How many times have you as a leader, or I know I have said this many times, we hired you for a reason. You've got a great background. We know people that know you. I know you, whatever it is. And so I know you know what you're doing when it comes to selling, but you have to be willing to take all that you know, suspend your sense of belief, give it a quarter to 2 to allow yourselves in a good way to be brainwashed to better understand the way the company has successfully been doing X, Y, or Z. And then take all your knowledge, filter it together, and the best you will get out there and kick some ass.
That's what you have to do. And I'll tell you, I learned that almost verbatim. I had Evan Ross, someone was asking for an example. When I was 26, I joined Career Builder. And I was the second to last person to sell something. I was very successful in sports, number 1 salesperson at both organizations I worked at. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, Jake, I listened to the call. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean? I'm doing my thing. He's like, dude, he goes, do you think we wrote this script for thousands of people because it doesn't work and we're dumb? And I was like, right. I didn't think of it that way, but no, you guys aren't stupid. Things are going well. Okay. So again, to your point, drink the Kool-Aid, right? He's like, dude, he's like, just follow it. Just trust me. I said, you know what? Hey, what I've been doing is not working. Let's do it. Sure enough, I sold 60,000 in new business the next month. Got promoted to leadership a month and a half later, right? I was only at the company for 3.5 months when that happened. And that was my biggest learning in this concept of, one, if you want to get promoted, you got to think about 2 levels above you, not the level above you, because they're the ones who promote you. And 2, you have to go back into every job with that beginner mind. Or let's say you've been at a job but you've gotten stagnant. See if you can go back there again. See if there are some new things that you can pull out. All right. So let's see, I think we got maybe time for one more. All right. Lots of people appreciating. This has been good, man. I really like the Q&A that we're getting into. And I've got servant leadership. I just feel like 9 times out of 10, the people that talk about it, I'm like, dude, I heard from a lot of people that you're actually a real asshole. That you preach. Servant leadership sounds really good. I'm here to serve. That is my job. I feel like it's one of those things that sounds better that, that it does. So the last question here, I'm going to let you take this one. And I think it's kind of the versions of a lot of this. Can you learn how to be a good leader? Or is it something that comes naturally to some people? I've talked about I think that there's a lot of importance around techniques. I didn't really give you a chance to share your thoughts. So what are your thoughts around you're born with it versus, you learn great leadership?
I do think there are some born leaders, but those people may not even know it until some life experience is thrust upon them, right? They always say, you don't, develop character every minute of the day, but when real adversity hits, that's when true character reveals itself.
Yeah.
We've all known people, they're there when you're in a bind because they feel like it's what they should do.
Right.
But they're never there other times. And then some people, they're your friends or your coworkers and they're loyal. But when the shit really hits the fan, they pull a disappearing act. Sometimes because they don't know what to say or they don't know what to do, but just sometimes just being there. In my last company, we had a coworker who passed away from cancer, and we were all amongst the broader team really, really close and worked together for 7 years. And sometimes it's just the people that call you up and say, "Hey, how you doing?" I don't have the right words to say, but how you doing? I'm here, right? I'm in the moment. So some are born leaders, but others, I do think you can develop a lot of really great leaders. But for me, I didn't know whether I was born to lead people or run companies or any of that. I really, coming out of college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I started seeing traits of really good leaders that I was around, whether I reported to them or not. And little by little, you put those bricks in the wall and you say, I think that's who I am. I think that's who I want to be.
Yeah.
Keep surrounding yourself with quality people and it'll all take care of itself.
That's right. And I think there's also, they talk about this, right? That there's people that are really amazing wartime generals and people that are really amazing peacetime. And I think that also what I've realized is that I think for the longest time in my career, I think I'm a extremely good wartime general. I think from a leadership standpoint, I naturally have that, all right, let's get shit together. Let's get shit done. I have that ability to rally people. But what I realized over time is that, but I haven't necessarily been as strong of a, things are performing well. How do I now flourish it? Because it just hasn't been the situations that I've inherited. So I've kind of learned these. And so I think even as you mature as a leader, you start to round out these other skills too of it's not always about mobilizing and pivoting and changing and doing those things. But I think a lot of people are suffering because if you grew up in leadership in the last 5 to 6 years, you're a peacetime general. And that's why you're struggling right now probably, is you don't know how to make those pivots. I started at Career Builder in 2007 and was there through 2010. I was my teams were selling job ads in the late 2010s or 2000s. So I only knew that, but it hurt me. What I realized though is it hurt me later in my leadership career that I didn't know how to lead people in times of peace because I was always making the decisions and moving, and there's different leadership types. So I think we also have a natural tendency to be maybe a little more one than other. That would be kind of my parting thought. So appreciate everyone for tuning in. Thank you, man. I thought this was a good convo, man. I don't get to talk leadership theory and strategy all the time. So this is kind of fun for me.
This is great. Thanks for having me on, Jake.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. And so did we drop Michael's LinkedIn? Make sure to follow Michael on LinkedIn. We'll drop his link here now if we can, team. This will be on YouTube probably by Wednesday. If you guys follow my YouTube, it's Jake Dunlap Sales on YouTube, so you can find it there. And yeah, I really appreciate it, man. And I think I really appreciate all the questions that were coming in, and everyone, chiming in with their thoughts on it as well too. So there's the link. Make sure to follow Mike, and we'll see everyone next Monday. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.